everyone, and welcome back to Current Affairs Unfiltered. I'm your host, Paige. So this is my first solo episode in maybe like 3 weeks. Feels good to be back. However, it took everything in me not to make a solo episode 2 weeks ago because that was in the middle of the OBBB and everything kind of felt like it was melting down. However, it did feel nice to not feel like I had to like rush to put an episode out. But yeah, if you're watching my reels or you saw my reels, my eyebrows accidentally dyed way too dark. I look like a crazy person on the internet, but that's okay. And that's about it. So this week we're covering a little bit of everything, mostly the big BS bill, as well as some other kind of more minor news stories, including what shouldn't be that surprising, but Trump saying an anti-Semitic slur so dated that I wasn't even aware it was a thing. So that's fun. The other thing I will say is that I'm trying to soft plan a trip to go to Iceland. And I know I have a couple of listeners every week from Iceland. So if you're listening to this, please DM me with your recommendations. So that's what I was doing on my week off a couple of weeks ago, as I was trying to soft plan that trip. Before we jump into it, I do want to say I'm recording this on Wednesday, July 9th at about 8 p.m. Eastern time. So anything that happens between now and when this episode comes out on Monday, not my responsibility. So let's get into it. First thing I want to talk about is the floods in Texas, which included Camp Mystic, an all-girls Christian camp. As of right now, the death toll is about 120. There are still 160 people missing. Watching the death toll climb over the last few days has been, I really don't even have words for it. Like, it started so small, and as it's grown and grown and grown, it's just made the impact of what happened so much worse. So over the 4th of July weekend, torrential rains unleashed flash floods across Kerr, Blanco, and Gillespie counties, dumping months of rainfall in mere hours. The Guadalupe River swelled dramatically, tearing through cabins, homes, and entire communities. This included Camp Mystic, as I said, as well as other camps on the river, camping kind of RV parks. In terms of Camp Mystic, though, camp leaders reported that within just 30 minutes, the camp was submerged. Roughly 750 campers and staff were on site that night, and at least 27 individuals, although the numbers are still climbing, they're not sure, both youth and counselors, were tragically killed, with many more still unaccounted for. I will say what I found to be the most heartbreaking was the camp director, who had been there for decades, who died trying to save multiple girls and get out of the flood zone. But the most distressing part for me about the event, in its entirety, is the fact that residents are saying that they didn't receive emergency alerts or were receiving them too late to really do anything about it. Lots of people that have come out of this alive have said, like, I just thought it was a typical summer storm, and they went to bed not really thinking much of it, only to, at 4 a.m, be awoken to rainfall and nasty river water in their sleeping quarters. I think these are the types of events where you can't really blame anybody, in terms of decisions that people personally made to move or not move, or, what they thought about the storm. But nonetheless, Governor Abbott has declared a state of emergency and deployed state-level assets alongside the National Guard. FEMA also announced that it would be sending rescue teams and federal aid to support recovery and search operations. Donald Trump wrote a little letter and was like, Kristi Noem's on speed dial. Okay. It is making me think. I think in my last solo episode, I talked about how Trump's planning to shut down FEMA. Like, what this would be if FEMA were already shut down. It's a little distressing. There's a lot of people on the news that have been hooting and hollering about, like, we need help. And it seems as though by next year that help might not be there anymore. There is an investigation underway trying to piece together what exactly went wrong. They're looking at the communication breakdown and what happened on all levels, local, regional, and federal. Some families have set up GoFundMe campaigns for relief efforts, but hundreds of people are dead. In my humble opinion, I think this flooding was twofold. I think there were a lot of tweets talking about, like, oh, it never rises this quickly. Like, it never rains this much. Okay, that's climate change. Welcome to 2025. It's only going to keep happening more and more frequently. The other thing is Trump getting rid of certain weather tracking things and firing people at the NOAA very well could have impacted how much we knew about the rain coming in, the alert systems. They just don't know yet. One thing I didn't appreciate was somebody at the Texas state level had said, like, oh, we didn't know. And, like, kind of, like, didn't call it for what it was, okay, well, you didn't know because there weren't people staffed. Like, I don't know. I don't want to say that this accident was preventable because you can't control the river. Has anybody ever watched Pocahontas? You can't control nature. It's going to do what it's going to do. But what you can do is ensure that you have all of the warning systems in place, all the proper people in place to warn and also to respond in a timely manner. I think one of the most horrifying things I heard was people's cars were just, swept off the road and swept off where they were, and they'd be floating down the river, and people out of the water that were just watching the river flow could hear people banging on the windows from inside their car. That's horrifying. That's scary. Like I said, things like this are only going to keep happening with more and more frequency. That's just climate change. Every single article says rain like this isn't normal, and it's not normal, not because, like Marjorie Taylor Greene says, because Jewish people are controlling the weather, but because climate change is happening right in front of us. Call it for what it is. Moving on to international news, we're going to talk about the US and Israel and Iran. This, I have a personal gripe, okay? Because I have a friend who lives in Dubai. She was supposed to come here. But then they started bombing each other, and Dubai closed their airspace. Sorry, the UAE closed their airspace. And for nothing. Nothing was accomplished. So I want you to keep that in mind as I work through the rest of this, because hot take, this was for nothing. This was absolutely for nothing. Nothing was accomplished. So, in short, Israel bombed Iran, quote unquote, preemptively, because they were saying Iran is close to a nuclear weapon. Spoiler alert, everybody's been saying Iran is close to a nuclear weapon for decades. So take that with a grain of salt. Then Bibi Netanyahu started goading Trump into it, and Trump was like, I'll decide in 2 weeks. I'll decide in 2 weeks. If you tell somebody I might hit you, you should probably expect them to leave, which is exactly what Iran did. Iran moved their enriched uranium. They moved the things they needed to remove. And then Trump bombed them. Trump said it was a big success, and like he's like the master of deception, because he said that he was going to decide within 2 weeks and then bomb 2 days later. Like, that's not deception, but okay. Anyways, so Trump bombs Iran, is like, oh my god, we completely obliterated everything. Everything's gone. They're destroyed. And then Israel kept trying to send bombers in, and Trump was like, then Trump got on national television and was like, they don't know what the app they're doing, but I actually said the word. It's actually a really funny video. I saved it on my phone so I could send it to people. And then Trump's telling Israel, turn your planes around, like, we're going to figure this out. And then Iran bombs a U.S. military site, which is why the UAE closed its airspace, but gave the U.S. prior warning, so it was all evacuated, and now we're here. Nobody's fighting anymore. Nobody's doing anything. The goal with the US strikes was to knock out more of Iran's nuclear program. We kind of, from my perspective, got involved because we have this bomb that is colloquially called the bunker buster. And Israel doesn't have something like that. So Israel was bombing, but they weren't accomplishing the things that they wanted and felt that they needed to accomplish. So they called in good old Donnie T to come drop a bunker buster. The reported goal of all of this was to keep Iran from building a nuclear weapon, because according to them, Iran was minutes, seconds, hours from completing a nuclear weapon. Almost immediately after dropping the bombs, after Donald Trump dropped his bombs, he got on television and was like, we destroyed everything. Like, they're obliterated. Didn't even wait for like intelligence reports to come out. Just said it's obliterated. And everybody was kind of like, I just doubt that. Whatever. Reports come out. Guess what? It's not obliterated. It was not. There's clearly evidence of damage, but they're not obliterated. Like, Iran, there is some evidence that Iran did like move their stuff. We have no idea where they moved it to. We have no intelligence on where the stuff is now, how much they have. Like, this didn't accomplish anything. If some reports are saying that we pushed it back by about a year, I know that back when Obama was kind of trying to think about what he was going to do about it, intelligence was saying that by bombing them, you were only setting them back like at maximum a couple of years. And therefore, he decided that the best way for like long term, making sure that they didn't have a nuclear weapon, was to engage in the JCPOA and negotiate and be diplomatic. Like a good president does. In the aftermath, Iran suspended all cooperation with the IAEA, darkening the region's nuclear oversight. So there are now no observers on the ground. Nobody. The reason we had the information that Iran's uranium had reached, 60% enrichment, whatever. I'm not a nuclear scientist, okay? I'm just here to report what I read. Well, the reason we had that information was because there were inspectors on the ground. We don't have that anymore. We literally have zero information. We don't know where it is. We don't know how much they have. We don't know how enriched it is. Israel was also trying to take out like scientists and whatever. They still have scientists. They still have scientists that know what to do. And as long as they have scientists that know what to do and how to further enrich the uranium, you're not really setting anything back, especially because they took and moved what they had. The way to ensure that you were actually going to destroy what they had was not by standing in front of the cameras and going, oh, I'll decide if I'm going to bomb them within a couple of weeks. No, it's supposed to be a surprise. It's supposed to be a surprise. That's how you obliterate that. I fear. To the left-right divide, Republicans were praising the show of strength, and skeptics and everybody else were saying that it was a overstep, especially because it didn't have congressional authorization, and because of that, a constitutional violation. What I will say is that Obama was the king of pressing the bomb button. Obama was hitting it hourly, minutely, so much so that certain sectors of the left wing will call him a war criminal. Okay? It is a little bit hypocritical if you don't call Obama out, but then say that Trump, broke the Constitution, whatever it is. That's a little bit hypocritical. However, this was by no means like a show of strength, and it was wrong that he didn't notify Congress. It was wrong when Obama did it, and it was wrong when Trump did it. Period. End of story. The other thing is that these strikes and the weapons that we're giving to Israel and the planes we moved, like, it's all costing us. We'll get into it, but there was a huge jump in the defense budget because we've been shipping all of our weapons elsewhere. Like, we're depleting our own stock. Not that we're heading to war anytime soon, fingers crossed, but that's still a problem. We need time to recuperate. Anyways, now we're, maybe 10 days out from this kind of coming to a conclusion. Maybe a little bit more than that. The region is a little bit on edge. However, everyone's opened up their airspace, but I still didn't get to see my friend. Israel has said that they are still willing to act independently if Iran builds enrichment. Iran, in turn, appears to be speeding up, working on alternate enrichment sites. Duh! What did you think they were going to do? For Israel, this was a regime change war. They want a regime change. For the U.S., in my humble opinion, they want minerals. They want minerals that Iran has. And they can't get that without a regime change, but their goal is the minerals. This whole thing was just a mess. And again, it didn't accomplish anything. The US has no minerals. There wasn't a regime change. They still have their uranium. They still have scientists. What did it accomplish other than be a dick measuring contest? And all this is going to do, and this is so hard to explain to normal everyday people. Even I, like as a student, didn't really understand this. But when the US does things like that, it creates radicals. It creates people that hate America. It creates people that want to harm Americans and do terrorism. That's what an action like this does. So when there is a spike in terrorism in, 5-10 years, you should be able to look back to this moment and pinpoint what radicalized those people. There is a direct line from US interference in the Middle East to 9/11. And I fear that this is going to give the same kind of line to something 10, 15 years down the road. And it also upsets me because a lot of the Republican response was, liberals are freaking out about like the implications, they don't understand. And it's hard to say as a liberal, this is very bad, but you won't see the implications for 10, 15 years. That doesn't make sense to the average person. And I get it. Like, it doesn't make much sense to me. Like, I'd love to just set it and forget it about this. But I do know that the longer term implications are the worst ones. Thank God. Anyway, I could go on about this one for forever. This was so stupid. It was a bad decision. It was a poorly planned decision. And now Trump and Bibi are beefing. Bestie Bibi, it's no longer a bestie. Nothing was funnier than Trump being like, Bibi, turn the planes around. Bibi, don't bomb them again. Bibi, there's a ceasefire. That was also a key part. Trump was like, there's a ceasefire in place. And Iran and Israel were like, what ceasefire? And then Trump was like, Bibi, turn the planes around. There's a ceasefire. Bibi was like, wait, what? Now maybe their bestie status is being reinstated because Trump is all up in arms about Bibi being on trial. Like, anyways, more to come on that. But yeah, so stay tuned for 10 years from now when there is a new group of radicalized individuals. Let's move on to my second favorite topic. The one big beautiful bill, or the one big BS bill, or as I think this episode will be titled, the one big beautiful backslide. Because that's what this is. We're going backwards. The bill is a $3.3 trillion tax and spending reconciliation package. It inflamed tensions in the Senate. I can't recall where this was when I put my last episode out, but I think it had passed in the House and maybe gone to the Senate at that point. There were some hopes that the Senate would be a little bit more moderate and, I don't want to say fix the bill because it was so bad that I'm not even sure that it was fixable, but make it less horrible, let's say. The Senate shocked even I, and they somehow made it worse. It made it have negative effects for more people. The Senate version has a permanent extension of Trump-era tax cuts from 2017 or 2018. That's cuts to Medicaid and modifications to the child tax credit. At one point, people were saying to get rid of, I think when the bill was in the Senate committee, they were trying to put amendments up that would be like, oh, people that make over $1 billion a year have to pay more in taxes, and Republicans kept voting them down, in case anyone was confused as to who's supposed to benefit from this. There were multiple amendments added, including steeper Medicaid reductions, smaller credits, and cuts to popular energy incentives. However, it did have some consequences. There was a brief moment where it didn't look like the bill was going to pass the Senate. North Carolina Senator Tom Tillis said he wouldn't be voting for the bill, and then very quickly was like, also, I'm retiring. I have to assume that he thought he was going to retire beforehand and was like, what better way to announce it now so nobody bothers me? So I can't blame him for that. But he came out against it. He was railing against it on the Senate floor. There were other holdouts, such as Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski, who really seemed like she was going to be the strongest link, but then she carved out like a special section just for Alaska. And then the parliamentarian was like, girl, you can't do that. You can't just carve out a special thing for your state. So they got rid of it, and then she still voted yes. And then afterwards in media interviews was like, that's the most agonizing thing I've ever done. Girl, you didn't have to. You didn't have to. She literally has a book coming out about how Trump pressures her all the time and how she's so strong. Not anymore. Not anymore, girl. Anyways, so the bill gets out of the Senate. It was a 50-50 tie. J.D. Vance breaks the tie. Whatever. It goes back to the House. People are mad. The kind of hardliners, the America First Party, wants even more cuts to Medicaid. Just like beating my head against a wall, literally. It did eventually come to a vote in the House. They were trying to pass it quite literally in the middle of the night. And finally, Leader Jeffries got up and did a real long speech so that they would pass it in the light of day. The one, perhaps a little bit funny thing to come out of this is that as they were taking the final vote, Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, a Republican from Pennsylvania, voted no on the bill and then promptly ran out of the chamber, went home, and turned his phone off. I think that's so funny. It's weak, but to picture him voting no, running out, and then everybody being like, wait, we need to call Brian. I want to ask him why. I need to ask him all these questions. And he was just unreachable is just a little bit funny to me. Anyways, it passed eventually, and it was signed into law over this past weekend. Other things in this bill include cutting Planned Parenthood, which will close, I think they've said about 200 locations. It also skyrockets the defense budget. Like I said, it has Medicaid cuts. It includes work requirements, which in theory people tend to like. However, I feel like people are confused. They don't know what Medicaid is. People think that it's like a check that you get in the mail. No, it's not. You're so poor, you go to the hospital and your stuff's covered. There's no check from that. It's basically just state insurance. The other thing is that a lot of people are on Medicaid and they don't know that they're on Medicaid because their state calls it something different. Look that up maybe. If you're on a state-funded healthcare program, it's probably Medicaid. There's also the tax cuts to a lot of billionaires. I've read some things about how it's easier now for people to buy yachts. That will never be a problem of mine, I don't think. This bill is also deeply unpopular with the American public. It has broken through to a lot of Republican voters that this is not a good bill, and even still, people seem to not really care what their constituents thought and voted for it. That's what I think makes me the most sad, is that these politicians are so bought and paid for that even though this is very well maybe the most unpopular piece of legislation to have passed, it didn't matter. Typically, if the opposing party is able to make a bill so publicly unpopular, they'll just scrap the bill. That is typically what happens, and that has happened before. But in this case, it was so publicly unpopular, and it still passed because they don't care. They don't care. Doesn't matter. And there are people, representatives, senators that are saying, "Oh, we're gonna lose the House, maybe even the Senate. Let's be hopeful." Now, as the bill was working its way through the channels, Elon Musk was all up in arms. we're going to talk about him now. So Elon had come out when Trump and Elon were beefing and said, I don't like this bill at all. Okay, King, say it again. He then was like, if this bill passes, I'm going to start a new party. So he's been railing against the bill for a while. Surprise, surprise, he stuck to his word. The bill passed on whatever day that was. And I think on Monday, he announced the America Party to like get rid of the uniparty of Democrats and Republicans. Elon called the legislation a disgusting abomination, claiming it paves the way for U.S. economic collapse. And in a surprise, he's now aggressively positioning it as a third-party alternative focused on, this is what kills me, fiscal conservatism, free speech, and populist narrative. Okay, fiscal conservatism, fine. There was also somebody, I think that had spoken to him that was like, yeah, it's like a socially liberal party. Fiscally conservative and socially liberal. That's an oxymoron, because if you would describe yourself as socially liberal, chances are you believe in gay rights, you believe in medical care access for everybody, you believe in fair housing and, things like that. You can't pay for programs like that if you're fiscally conservative. So riddle me that, Elon. I'd love to hear more. Now, I don't think this is anything to worry about because there's been a lot of attempts to start third parties like this. And even the kind of established ones that we have, Green Party, Libertarian Party, they're fighting for their lives to get their candidates' names on ballots because it's a complicated process and they don't have the foundation and other backing to do that. Because this is, it's Wednesday, this happened on Monday, it's unclear whether this is a genuine political campaign or a publicity gambit. As of this point, this seems like a ploy to squeeze Republicans out of the Trump kind of Republican Party, but there doesn't seem to be any existing politicians, especially not the big name ones, that are willing to walk away and go join the America Party. However, if it does end up working out, it does seem like good news because this will fracture the Republican vote. But yeah, so that's fun and silly. Fingers crossed he can keep this going through the midterm so it splits that vote. However, I say all of this to say that Elon Musk he's just an agitator at this point. He's just pushing Trump's buttons and saying what he thinks is going to get clicks and views in media. And I have to assume that he's fully aware that his public image is, como se dice, in the toilet. And I don't think he's willing to acknowledge that this is not his genius. His genius is in the other stuff he does around the electric cars, whatever, even though I kind of am in the camp that he's not a genius at that either. But I digress. That's what his genius is in. And he isn't acknowledging that it's not in politics. If he was smart, he'd bring in some smart people to help run this thing. But there's no information yet, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So we'll see how this shakes out. But it could mean that the road to taking the House back and maybe even the Senate in 2028 is a little bit clearer. Fingers crossed. Okay, now we're going to talk about the Supreme Court. Just 6 white supremacists and 3 libs. They had a whole bunch of decisions come out over the last few weeks, I think, late June until now. There's only a couple I want to talk about. However, I would recommend going to read up on them. A lot of them were handing Trump wins. There were very few Trump losses in any of these, but the one I want to talk about is the decision they made regarding federal firing. I was going to say hiring and firing, but it's just literally just the firing. The court lifted an injunction by a district judge that blocked Trump's executive order enabling massive federal workforce shifts. This now clears the way for the controversial Schedule F and layoffs of thousands of federal employees across the Commerce Department, Health and Human Services, the VA, and beyond. The administration argued that it reinvigorates civil service and empowers executive flexibility, read Trump's flexibility, but critics are calling it a calculated move to consolidate power, and silence bureaucratic resistance. The ruling triggered concern from dissenting justices. Ketanji Brown Jackson called it a stark example of power abuse, warning that it ended nonpartisan federal agencies and institutional integrity. Historical support systems are at risk, such as climate research, medical oversight, veterans care. I say that this is just indicating that Trump's going to continue to reshuffle civil service in the next 3 years until he hopefully gets the hell out of there. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse at this point. I've talked on this podcast a lot about how I have friends that work for the government, and they're some of the most stand-up people that I know. They go to work because they are passionate about helping people and keeping America safe, not because they are pushing a political agenda, and certainly not because they love Donald Trump either. It's disheartening to see this turned into something so partisan and seeing Like, the whole reason the civil service exists as it does, with making it harder to fire people, is because they were trying to prevent people like Donald Trump, a president, coming in and firing people that weren't in their party. However, when you work for the government, nobody's asking you what your political affiliation, except for apparently Trump is now doing that. So this makes me sad. It makes me worried that he's being reinforced now to think that this is okay. I mean, I guess they said it wasn't illegal, so I guess it's okay. But like, morally, dicey. So now we're going to stick on Donald Trump, and we're going to talk about the anti-Semitic term he used. Now, this is a term that, in my opinion, keep in mind, I come from a conservative father who drops slurs like it's candy. I have never heard this word in my life. Trump is dropping slurs from like 1940s Germany, okay? And that's why I think it went over so many people's heads. He went to a rally in Des Moines, Iowa to promote the OBBB. And this is what he said. He was talking about going to banks and getting like mortgages.
To the banks and borrowing from some cases a fine banker, and in some cases Shylocks and bad people.
Now, the word that he used, and this is impressive for Trump, comes from Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, where it is used to describe a Jewish moneylender, long seen as an anti-Semitic trope. The ADL, who... you can think what you want about the ADL. I'm not the biggest fan of them, but they did, and they are typically like kind of pro-Trump, but they called the term extremely offensive and dangerous for invoking stereotypes about Jewish greed. The Jewish Council for Public Affairs called it quintessential anti-Semitic rhetoric and said it wasn't accidental. Duh. Democratic Representative Dan Goldman denounced it as blatant and vile anti-Semitism. Chuck Schumer and others also publicly condemned the language. Now, of course, Trump claimed ignorance of the term's connotations, saying he thought, like, I don't even want to, like, repeat it. I guess saying he thought the word simply meant a high-interest lender. Sir, you were raised in New York, were around in New York for the worst, New York City, for the worst parts of it, the most vile parts, and you want to say you didn't know what it meant? He's saying that he never heard it that way, although the anti-Semitic implications are widely known and recorded. Now, I do not want to defend Donald Trump, but what I will say is that in 2014, Joe Biden used the same word, got in trouble for it, and issued an apology. In Joe Biden's context, he was using it to describe the fact that Beau Biden's friends were having their homes foreclosed upon, and he was using it to refer to like the mortgages, it seems like, not to defend Joe Biden because it is a bad word. But nonetheless, he issued an apology. For Donald Trump, 11 years later, to make the same mistake and then go, oh, I didn't know. What? The last president got in trouble for it 11 years ago, and you think like both uses were bad, okay? But to sit there and say, oh, I didn't know, like, just apologize. And listen, I don't like to apologize either, okay? I hate it. I hate apologizing. But that's how you get out of this. For somebody who's so like rah-rah about the Jewish community and everything that could possibly look down at Israel is considered anti-Semitic, like, to not issue an apology on this is odd. I think Bibi Netanyahu has even been quiet on this. Like, just can't. But it is, I think, going over a lot of people's heads. Like I said, I think that is such an outdated term that people just aren't really talking about it that much. But yeah, so that is kind of all I have this week. There are other minor stories. There's a lot that happened in the last 3 weeks, but rumor has it Pete Hegseth is being iced out. Tulsi Gabbard is being iced out. So stay tuned on that. I had some stuff written out about that, but it seems like it's still developing. And they're maybe half thawed. They're not like iced out completely yet. So I'm going to keep my eye on that, but I'm hoping to talk about that in 2 weeks. But that is all I have. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode of Current Affairs Unfiltered. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow, leave a review, or share it with someone who could use this information. And as always, if you have questions, topic suggestions, or just want to say hi, you can find me on social media at Current Affairs Unfiltered Pod on Instagram, or send me an email at currentaffairs.unfilteredpod@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Next week, we are going to be talking about more money. We're going to be talking about PACs and super PACs, and I have a great guest named Adam Bishop who has started his own super PAC called Just Future Fund, and I already recorded the episode, so it's all done, but it was a really good conversation. I'm really looking forward to this. This is like the money and the conversations around education are, I think, my favorite to do. Like, I find it so fascinating, so I'm really excited for this episode to come out. But anyways, keep asking questions, stay engaged, and tell your friends and family how much the big BS bill sucks. I'll see you guys next week.